Hello, my name is Gabe, and today I have the honor of reading Dava Shastri's Last Day. Forgive me for mispronunciations. The book is basically, well, about the last few days, actually, of a mega-rich celebrity with cancer who decided to go the assisted suicide route. There's a lot more to it than that, but that's the basic premise out of the way. I enjoyed this book a lot. It is the author Kirthana Ramisetti very first published novel, and it is actually really good in certain respects. There are a few things that could use some work, and we'll get to that, but for the most part, the novel is really good. So, one thing this novel does is has a ton of moving parts. Like, there are so many facets, but the book basically boils down to the titular Dava Shastri's relationship with the world and her family, more importantly her family, and how that affects those around her, and how it doesn't. We'll get to that in a second. And in telling that, and in focusing on that concept, the story tells, well, what I would say, is a tapestry the right word? It tells the intertwining tales of several people who ultimately are affected, sometimes positively, more often than not negatively, by Dava's reputation and her ambition. And in that regard, this story does a really good job, for the most part. She has 4 children, and ultimately those 4 children have been affected by her legacy. And ultimately this story is about how that ultimately plays out for them. And, well, for the most part, not great. If I were to say anything about this story, it's that Dava is both its protagonist and very much its antagonist. There is basically no illusion given that basically every altruistic thing she's done has been in service of her ego. And ultimately, whilst a lot of things do change about her by the end of the novel, this is something that does not. And the novel even begs the question whether or not it even should be a concern. Basically, her desire is that her name and her family name basically live on forever. And the only way to do that would be if her family continues in her footsteps. So she oftentimes tries to pressure them to do so, whether they want to or not. And as you can imagine, this creates bitterness. And that's what I would say the focus of Dava's story is on. That bitterness, that sense of why isn't her family doing what she wants them to do? Or her family needs to do this, so do this. And it's so bad that she basically says, you have to continue my legacy, or I will deny you inheritance. It's also worth noting, one of the reasons she goes with assisted suicide is so that she can claim she died earlier than she did and see the world's reaction to her death. Which is ultimately what her focus is on. So, I guess that's her story, and eventually, I guess, spoilers if you care, she does kind of let go of trying to force her kids, but honestly, that conclusion is one of the weaker stories in this book. It really is. It feels like it came out of nowhere when it really didn't have to. Or rather, I guess more actually, it came to her in a dream, but the dream itself came unprompted. well, her story is concluded in a way that I think is not great. As a character, she is one of the best written villains I've ever read. But there is so much talk about the lessons she learned and everything else that I think it deserves to be the bulk of this review. Several moments, there's a point where it sounds like she's about to offer some helpful wisdom, or she's learned a lesson early on in the book, and will move on, and then she just turns around and takes the complete wrong takeaway. The fact is, she tried, in order to get the ego boost she wanted, she compartmentalized her life. I can't be seen crying, and I can't blah blah blah. And in doing so, she hurt herself. One of the most notable things that it took her the longest time to realize was the one person she had a genuine relationship with was the one person who she wasn't worried about her reputation with. Her child, her secret child, who's revealed fairly early on in the book, who basically, because it's a secret child, she doesn't have to worry about that child affecting her reputation. And ultimately, that's the child she has that feels the best around. But that is the point. She never realizes or never lets herself make the connection. Because she needs to boost her reputation above all else. It's kind of amazing. With that being said, there are some nitpicks that need to be given. Because there are so many characters and stuff happening in this book, a lot of stuff doesn't get the focus it really needs. It feels like the youngest child, the second youngest child, and the oldest really get the shaft. They have stories and storylines, but it really feels like the book does not hone in on it. Which means that the resolution of those stories feel kind of rushed. Or in some cases, plain invisible. And what I'm going to say, a small nitpick, but a lot of scenes, remember how I said Dava's story doesn't feel like it's concluded? Well, it could have been alleviated by moving some scenes around. Specifically, there is a point in the book where people start coming and standing up to her for the first time, probably ever, and saying they're not going to follow in her footsteps. And that could have been a moment for a turning point for her. It allows her kid to be actively a part of her story just as much as she is theirs. And I think that would have been cool, and all it would really require is shuffling of scenes. That being said, the weakest aspect of this book, by far, is how the book handles actual children aged children. All of her direct children are, well, adults, but they have children, her grandchildren, if you will. And the thing is, they're kind of, well, horribly written. And I don't necessarily blame the author for this. Kids are very hard to write, and it's well common knowledge. But kids don't behave like adults. But they also don't behave the completely idiotic way people depict them. So finding that middle ground is very hard. But what I will say is, when a child is written well, you can usually tell what age range they're in just by reading. But also, children don't care for the least the same things adults do. So writing children who are, I don't even know how old they're supposed to be, who both at times in this book feel like they're written like they're 10, 7, 12 maybe? And then other times feel like they must be 17, almost adults. And these are the same characters, by the way. And their ages are never actually specified, so I have no idea what age they're even supposed to be. But they're just written plain, ugh. And it shows and makes the book, it makes their scenes just annoying more than anything else. Anyways, this was kind of a rambly review. This one was hard to review because there is so much going on, like I said. But guess I'll give my final rundown. despite my nitpicks, this is a really good book. I heartily recommend finding the opportunity to read it, if you can. I might actually be curious what this author does in the future as well. But more important, if you like this video, leave it a like. If you want to see more like it, do subscribe. But more importantly than anything else, have a good night.